genuine leadership as opposed to dictatorial management. Leadership and management are two different things. Leadership
Amen.
is drawing people to follow you by both example and inspiration. And again, it's a concept that neither you nor I can teach people, just like this concept of culture of training, but it is a topic that needs to be talked about and needs to be put out there regularly. I see that as a failure point for a lot of teams as well, is they don't have good leadership, and I think that's important, especially when you're trying to develop this long-term culture of training.
Welcome to the Church Security Through Prevention podcast, and I'm your host, Daniel Blevins. I am thrilled to have Paul Lake back again as a guest and to talk about having a culture of training in our churches. If you missed our previous podcast together on developing an emergency response plan, I would highly encourage you to go back and listen to it and share it with others in your church leadership as well as other churches that you may be in contact with. It was probably one of the most impactful podcast topics that we have had, with a lot of new listeners and a lot of feedback that was given. I sincerely hope that churches around the country are engaged to make whatever necessary changes need to happen to strengthen and move forward the ministry of safety and security. Our conversation went long enough that this is a two-part podcast. And as usual, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast, as well as do a Google review for us. So let's get going and spend some time with Paul talking about what a culture of training should look like in our churches. Paul, welcome to the Church Security Through Prevention podcast.
Glad to be back.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you back. We were just talking a moment ago about how great the last podcast went, and just a huge response that was received from it. I'm really looking forward to this one too. You had mentioned this topic when we had met and talked last time on the culture of training, and it intrigued me on that because and we'll talk more about it today, but what that looks like, what that is, how do you effectively create a training environment to where people are not just motivated to serve, but they're motivated to train effectively, and then they're serving better when they are. And what does that look like? So go ahead and tell us a little bit about, what does a culture of training look like, for you, and how did you come up, into this realization of what needed to happen?
Okay, well, when I teach, I throw out the concept, don't get a chance to drill down on it like I hope we will today, but I'd start by telling the teams that I teach that one of their biggest obstacles is the routine. And what I mean by that is, as we all know, there's a lot of high-profile incidents that occur out there on a weekly basis across the nation. Those of us that are tapped into that see that. But in reality, most churches will go day in and day out without ever running into even a medical issue, much less a security issue or any type of threat environment. So the safety team members will report to duty, be assigned their position, go about that job, and never encounter anything of note. And eventually that begins to take its toll on two things. One, their effectiveness, and secondly, their job satisfaction. So if you agree with that, then how do we fix that? And that's kind of how the genesis of this concept of culture of training started in my head. So I think there are two issues wrapped up in this reality, one of which is your ability to minister to people. Chances are, if your team members are becoming less enthused about their duties, they're probably not also focusing on the opportunities to minister each week, because I'm of the opinion that every time the campus is open to the public, there are going to be opportunities to touch the lives of hurting people. And that's who you're looking for, by the way, as trained safety officers. You're looking for hurting people. And most of the time, that's the people that are going to need to be ministered to. So that's one issue that probably should be factored into how you think about your training program and eventually your training culture. But the other issue, probably more pertinent to the conversation today, is how do you motivate members to stay in the game? And even though this is just a routine day to day. And so I recognized this dynamic in my own team a number of years back and began to think my way through it. And realized that it did have an impact on the effectiveness of the job performance and long-term satisfaction. So I met with my training director for my team and over breakfast one morning, and I said, "Hey, let's brainstorm this. Let's figure out what we can do and how do we change this for our own team." And so as a result of that, we began to plan reality-based training, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But the goal and the thought process in that particular breakfast was to figure out a way to generate a desire to train, create an atmosphere that caused people to want to train, instead of having a program that required them to train. And there is a difference between those two.
Right.
So that's the way I would define a culture of training, is an atmosphere that generates a growing desire to train, as opposed to just a program that requires training through accountability, scheduling, tracking. All those things are important. You certainly need to do that. You need to track your training process and who's been trained in what, and there needs to be a schedule so people know when to be there and all that kind of stuff. But if you're having to rely on those elements and the accountability of a program to get your people out of their seats and into the room, then there's something missing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that, and I hear it a lot as you do around the country, that how do you keep a team motivated? How do you keep them engaged? And you're absolutely right about the ministry piece, because that is so much part of it that separates us from pretty much law enforcement to a degree. It's that ministry piece. It's that the church has got to be there for the hurting and the broken. I mean, that's what it's there for. And we're at the front line of that. So how are we equipping our individuals to do safety and security well, but also to minister well in what that looks like? I know as I've talked to different churches and as I've gotten a variety of emails, oftentimes it's a conversation of, and we talked about it a little bit in the last podcast, but they run out of things to train on. Like, I don't know what to train on. And that's where I thought, after the last podcast, you gave it was a great conversation on that within the crisis management realm of things and taking those pieces to train within. And we all, you mentioned reality-based training, and that's where we all tend to learn better anyway. And it's a practical, our seminars have gone that way to where we teach the topic and then we practice it, so that it's ingrained a little bit better. And then it's more fun. People actually have fun and they can poke fun at each other and so on in that. So how has this grown then? You had breakfast with your security director. So where did it kind of go from there?
Well, we began to develop these reality-based training concepts, and I used real-world incidents from faith-based environment, because at that time and up until recently, I was producing a weekly church safety update going out to my email list, and it just listed stories that were captured by the Google alerts that I had out there on everything related to safety, security within the church world. And so there were hundreds of those per week, and I would filter out and just get the top 10 or 12 and send them out. And so I had hundreds and hundreds of those collected. And we sat down and began to go through some of those and list out the ones that were most common and most likely to occur, and build a scenario base for our own staff. And so we started doing that with our own team. We would come together, we would walk through the elements of the issues to be run that day. Then we would run them full speed under stress. And it began to give our members some real world skills, build these real world video files inside their brain that they were able to retrieve under stress. As well as just developing individual confidence. And one of the examples I use, even when I teach about my own team, that helps drill home this point was when we first started doing this process on one of the very first events. I was the actor as the potential threat, sat inside our fellowship hall, which is a fairly long, wide room at one end in the dark, sort of. And the goal was, from my perspective, to see if one of my armed safety team members would be able to handle the situation. Would he get close enough to me for me to get my hands on him? If he did, was he able to call for help? And if so, would he be able to stay in the fight till help arrived? Would he be able to protect his weapon? All that kind of stuff. So I just acted like an mentally unstable person. It wasn't that big of an acting job for me, actually. And
not a huge stretch.
No, not a huge stretch. But I was unresponsive. And so he arrived on his routine rounds that morning, discovered me sitting in the back of the room from probably 60 feet away at the entry to the room. And he didn't call for help. He didn't call for backup. Once he made contact with me and I didn't respond, it was clear that this was out of the norm and there should have been backup there probably at that point. But he's a guy like all of us, felt like he could handle it. He did use good verbal skills, used good flashlight skills, tried to engage me, but he continued to close the gap between me and him. Eventually, he got close enough that I just broke on a run and chased him. He outrun me outside the door. When he got outside the door and turned the corner, he shot me in the chest twice. So with that story, I had presented no physical threat to him other than running at him. I didn't verbally threaten to harm him. I showed no weapon in my hand. And he ended up using deadly force. Why? The reason was because at that point, he had not had adequate hands-on training, and he didn't have a lot of confidence in his ability to deal with somebody physically. That was one issue. The other, he instinctively tried to gain distance between the threat and himself, which is nothing wrong with that. It was all in order to make a decision, and he did, but he made the wrong decision because he just hadn't had that experience. He didn't have that video file. He didn't have the opportunity to have made those decisions under stress. And we see that in the real world with street experienced and professionally trained law enforcement almost weekly. And so if you're going to expect your safety team members to respond any better without any additional training, that's a huge mistake. It's what I often refer to as stinking thinking. But that's how we began to develop. And so now we still, to this day, we've been on hiatus for a few months because of the pandemic, but we train 3 hours every second Saturday of the month with that process. And what I began to notice, and this is where the culture of training began to completely flesh itself out, is every Sunday morning before we would go on duty, we always have a duty briefing where we meet, talk about the events of the day, and pray over the day and get our minds and our spirits ready for what we're about to go to. But on the Sundays after our Saturday's training, that Saturday's training was the buzz, and a significant buzz, to the point where people were talking about, did you see what I did so stupid the day before? Or wasn't it great that this happened? And, oh, by the way, look at my skinned nose and elbow. And, guys are always comparing their red badges of courage. And so that dynamic, that buzz becomes the nucleus of your culture of training, because we begin to see our members push us as leaders to train them, because the conversation would innately turn to what can we do next month, as opposed to, are we going to have to do this again next month, kind of thing. And so that's the basis of a culture of training. It's not something that you or I can teach someone. We can simply talk about the concept, and leaders of individual churches have to catch that vision. And then by good leadership, they have to create that environment.
So let me ask you some details about your training, just from a logistical standpoint, as I think through it, and I think of how I've seen other churches do it and struggle with it. So when you bring on that Saturday, bring people in for training, about how many are showing up? We just want to take a quick break here to let you know how to contact us and where to find out more about our national seminar. I see communities that may know why church security is important, but they may not be doing anything about it or don't know how to do it well. Our national seminars are for ushers, greeters, children's workers, staff, volunteers, your security teams, and other ministries in your community. We say that this is a level 1 training that is designed to help equip you to serve well in your various ministries while maintaining a safe place for people to come. Getting churches on the same or similar page when it comes to security will only make the community safer as well. The easiest way to find out more information or to contact us is to go to cv-ministries.com. There you'll find a variety of training DVDs and books, with more being developed all the time. There's also a place at the bottom of the page where you can sign up for our monthly newsletter and to be able to get more information. We would love your feedback on topics or guests that you would like to hear on future podcasts. Okay, now that we have that out of the way, let's get back to the podcast.
Well, we are running just a little under 20 members. And so we have usually 80-90% of our people show up, so 15 to 18 people. So we don't have a huge staff. But I teach the same type of class across the country, and I usually limit it. If I'm a single instructor, I try to limit it to less than 30 members in the class, and then I break them into individual teams, and then I run teams. And those teams can watch what one team does, and then I do a different set of scenarios for the second team and the third team and so forth. So you can get creative, and you can do a fairly large if you got multiple instructors, which I do if I'm going to teach a class bigger than 30. And a lot of the learning comes from not just the doing, but the watching and the debriefing afterwards. And so you don't have to run every single member through every single scenario in order for every single member to get a benefit from it. You run people through, you critique what you've done, you fix it, then you go back and run it correctly until you've done it right enough that it becomes muscle memory.
Yeah, no, that answers a lot of my follow-up questions on that as well. Because what I've seen happen, what you just described, what you do around the country, very similar to what we do with our seminar, and when we go to the hands-on portion of it, breaking them up into smaller groups. Not everybody has to do everything, but there's still learning involved within that dynamic. Right. But what I've seen is that scenarios get run, or maybe there's not enough talent or individuals wanting to be that facilitator for a different scenario, where you break out into different parts of the building or whatever the case is. And so then you have a bunch of guys just sitting around, and then it becomes, waiting their turn to run a scenario. So you're right. We can't, the leaders have to be creative in catching the vision on how to do this and how to keep everybody engaged, even with this, because I've seen to where it can get to be not necessarily an effective use of a volunteer's time with potentially sitting around while others are doing it. The other aspect that kind of came to mind is, do you video record any of the scenarios that you run?
We've not only video recorded, we've even used body cameras on occasion to do that and go back and play that. Sometimes stop action. We did that early on. We don't do it as a routine. I don't do it in my classes because it's just an added element that I typically don't have time to
Absolutely.
implement. But for my own team, yeah, I think that's a great idea. You can have stationary cameras around. The problem is capturing the essence of what you're doing is difficult. Should you try it and learn from it? Yeah, but don't be surprised if your video results do not completely capture all of what you're trying to do in the training itself. It's just hard unless you've got a professional crew there to video it from multiple angles and then edit the stuff back together. You usually only get one perspective of it, and then not enough to really be able to tell a whole lot. But
True.
there is value in it, and this concept you're talking about people sitting around, I agree. What I do, let's just take an example. When I go to a church and teach a specific church's team, and then they may open it to the public where we've got additional people from outside their church team there, or they may keep it exclusive to their own team. I will make sure that, and here's a good example, and I'm going back to teach a second class, South Texas next weekend, actually, and they've got 30 members on their team. It's a large church, and the last class I taught, I think they had 21 members there. And so we set up a team of 7 members that were to be on duty, and the rest were congregants. And so most of the situations are going to involve the congregation at some level, even if the incident that you're running does not occur in the sanctuary where the people are. They are either going to need to be evacuated, they're going to hear something and respond, or they're going to be involved. And so those other people will get involved in the scenario to some degree. Okay, so I like to, and I found the most effective way is to put those people on team A, for instance, in their normal duty positions. Set them up, tell them what time of the day it's going to be when the incident occurs. Put somebody on stage in the role of the pastor or the music director or whatever, depending on the time the scenario is being run, and put everybody in place so that they are responding from and getting help only from people who hear what the radio traffic is. And here's an example. The very first scenario I ran at this particular church that I'm going back to, this was about 30 days ago, put everybody in their place, and the team that was going to discover this particular instance was the last to leave the sanctuary. When they left to go to their duty positions, they observed a vehicle that had impacted 2 double doors, the main entry points on the rear of the church. Hood was up, a subject was hanging out the door, and a person was pinned between the front of the vehicle and the doors, and there was smoke bellowing out of the hood of the car. So nobody else in the church, nobody in the congregation knew what was going on. The other people that were on duty didn't know what was going on. They all had to respond based on what that first person who discovered it said on the radio. The unique part about it was that particular setup blocked those doors so that the people trying to get to them to help make the rescue couldn't even get out those doors. So they had to go a whole different direction. So we had 2 victims. We had a heart attack person behind the wheel who was marked as non-breathing unconscious, still strapped in. And we had a person with a massive arterial bleed from the leg. And I had a Moulage kit on the leg with a pump that was actually squirting blood and screaming and smoke coming out everywhere. And so they're all expecting this to be a threat situation. And the very first thing out of the gun was actually an accident medical response. And so that realism, that juxtaposition of things and all happening in real time with people from real positions was how we set the tone for the rest of the day. And you can do those kind of things, and it makes a big difference in not only what's learned, because they figured out a lot of things. One, none Nobody had a tourniquet on them. Nobody was able. They had to modify a belt to try and stop the arterial bleed. Um, Nobody remembered to do CPR on the guy that was heart attack victim in the truck. Different things like that. There's just a lot to be learned from a simple scenario like that's easy to set up, and have everybody respond from their normal working position. Test your radio comms ability, your decision making, and then the whole congregation came out to see and became bystanders and videographers and interferers into the whole thing. So all that added an element of realism to it as well.
Yeah, that's a great example. In that, two things on it is something that, backing up just a little bit, at least when I'm out doing training somewhere, we usually save the last 30 minutes of it, which I would do, if I had a team under me as well, if I was at a church and doing training, to where you gather everybody back together, after they've run their,
Right.
Their different CBTs. And then oftentimes, I'm sure you see it too, there's a common theme of mistakes that are happening in it, to where I'll actually grab some volunteers and role play, some of the scenarios and explain, hey, this is the common mistake that happened today that we saw throughout the groups. Here's a better way. So they're leaving on, it's kind of like, firearm training. You don't leave on a failure. You leave on a positive. And the same sort of thing. I want them to leave on a positive. Here's how you do it properly in that. Give them that like you said, that video in their head of, if this were to happen, here's the better response, or a better way to handle it in that. And but bring them together so that they can all see and they can all glean from, just like, we know training's the place to make mistakes.
Well, absolutely. As a matter of fact, that's the principle that I apply not only to my own team, but that I teach, is that training should be pushing to a failure point and then fixing that failure point.
Right.
And if you're not doing that, then are you really training? Are you just practicing something you already know? And so in my basic class, I define the difference between teaching, training, and practice. And teaching is obviously just bringing information to the table for people to digest. Training is teaching them how to do something, and then practice is doing that something that they've been trained to do until it becomes muscle memory. And so the old adage of training, practice makes perfect, is not actually accurate. You've got to do it right, because you can practice something the wrong way, and all you do is ingrain the wrong thing. So teaching people what is to be done, then training them how to do it, and then encouraging them to practice it until it becomes instinctual is the steps that I try to follow, not just with my own team, but with every team that I teach. And I agree with your summation issue at the end of every day. I do the same. We not only stop after each scenario and debrief about what happened right there in that particular one, but
Right.
we do the same thing. We stop at the end of the day and give everybody opportunity to talk about what they saw and the things that they learned and what themes might have been running through it. And I would even encourage teams that are doing their own training to do an after action report of some type, and file that away as after you have had a chance to share it with the team. Put it in your training manual or whatever document you're using to track who gets trained on what, that kind of stuff. Keep up with that kind of stuff, and then maybe annually go back and look and say, did we really fix this? From this after action report, we identified communications errors in this area or whatever, and look at it from time to time and make sure that you have actually adjusted what you're doing. And then maybe each time you train, you create a focus for that day. Today, we're going to work on radio comms, and we're going to do it through reality-based training. Or today, we're going to work on control and compliance, and here's how we're going to do it. Or today, we're going to work on de-escalation, and here's how we're going to do it. So it's not just a willy-nilly, let's go get some blue guns and shoot at each other kind of reality-based concept that creates this culture of training. It's a focused, intentional, goal-setting process, but you do it so that it's so much fun and there's so much learning involved that the participants are excited about it, challenged by it, and want to come back and do it again.
There's an aspect of that too. If we go back to, prior to the vehicle accident, but how you set that up in the auditorium. I think, we call it in our seminars, we call it a total team concept. The security's got to be a total team concept. It's just not a few guys. They're standing on the wall. It's your ushers, it's your greeters, it's your staff, it's your children's workers. Everybody has to have that mindset and that culture of training. Do you ever incorporate them into your training?
I'm sorry, you're going to have to rephrase that one, I guess.
No, that's great. So with that, do the different ministries set aside a day to where your security team and, let's say, the children's workers and volunteers come in and do training together, so
staff
that staff and volunteers. But maybe it's just picking one ministry on a particular weekend. Say, okay, we're going to have children's ministry come in so that they can see how we're going to respond. They need to know what their expectation is for response, that sort of thing. I know, there's value to that. We've done it at our church before.
I have done it. We don't do it as a routine. I've done it on a large scale, even where, and I recommend this, and I even talk about the concept when I teach a very basic class, and that's there is benefit across a wide range of areas to do that. And to your point, if you can get members of your congregation there, then whatever they learn, they go back into the congregation. They're seated in the congregation as people who know what to do when the thing happens, whatever the thing is. Staff and teachers and people like that, that's even better. And what we've done before is we've also included our local law enforcement and fire department in a full day training where we bring them in to respond. And that's a lot of fun. It's also a logistical challenge to make all that happen. But on one of those events, we invited them to come stage on the property. We ran evacuation, we ran AED response with a heart attack, all of that kind of stuff. And then we ran an active shooter scenario that would allow both the law enforcement to respond to the active shooter and then for fire to respond to triage and rescue injured victims after the fact. That worked out great. It was a good way for the police and fire to get familiar with our facility. They understood that we had a program and what it looked like. It was good for our congregation because they got to see what the safety team was all about and what to do. The ladies loved it because they kept begging me to bring the firemen back to carry them out to the ambulance in the future. So that was an unknown benefit. So it was a fun thing. It was an educational thing, not only involving our people and our staff, but the emergency agencies that are going to respond. Obviously, you can't do that very often just because of the logistics, but yeah, you should have that on your radar. When I teach, I encourage the safety team people and their leadership to invite their ushers and greeters to be a part of the class, even if they don't want to be a safety team member when they grow up, to come and be a part of the class and learn what the safety team is supposed to be doing and have some of that knowledge so they become the extra ears and eyes for the safety team as they go about their normal activities. So yeah, the more people you can get involved, the better. Even if you just reach into the congregation and ask for people that are aspiring actors to come and play the roles that you need to play for your bad guys or for your disturbed people, or even as the nuisance guy that's interfering with your safety officers as they respond because he's sticking a video camera in their face. If you got people like that, they come and participate, then they go back into the church congregation better educated as well. And it's a big help to you when you're doing your training. So yeah, the more people you can pull in, the better, in my opinion.
Thank you so much for taking time to listen to this podcast. If you really enjoyed it and you found it of benefit to you, we really appreciate your feedback. There's several different ways that you can provide us feedback. One of them is to subscribe to the podcast, is to share it with others, and another is to contact us directly, particularly if you have any questions or concerns, or you want more information on how to host a seminar in your community. You can contact me directly at danielblevins@cv@heart.com, or you can go to our website at cv-ministries.com. Both of those will get you in the right direction. Until next time, make sure that you're out there protecting the flock with a heart of service.